Welcome to another episode of Military Monday. I'm your host, Mitch Arnold, and today I want to share some of the incredible history of our Korean War veterans. As we near our All-American Legacy Jump this Veterans Day in Kansas City, Missouri, where a member from every conflict starting from World War II to present, including our first responders from 9/11, will execute a tandem skydive, and our very own Ryan Birdman Parrott will base jump off of the 200-foot spire in full World War I uniform. I wanted to remind people and provide some insight into one of the most infamous battles in American history, the Chosin Reservoir. For Robert Whited and Gene White, two young men from different places stepping up and answering the call of their nation, there was never a question that they would serve in the military, and they never doubted the merit of the war they were sent to fight in, Korea. It was this unbending faith in their service as U.S. Marines that carried both men through America's darkest hour in the Korean War, the harrowing retreat from North Korea's Chosin Reservoir, where American forces were surrounded, vastly outnumbered, and facing mass slaughter in brutally cold mountains near the Chinese border. The Battle of the Chosin Reservoir was a pivotal event in the 20th century. A 2-week-long bloodbath pitting 30,000 U.S., ROK, and British troops against 120,000 Chinese soldiers was a defining moment of the Korean War. Fighting in the winter of 1950 in bitter cold and brutal terrain, men endured severe frostbite, sleepless nights, and total mental and physical exhaustion. Below zero temperatures, snow-covered mountains, icy roads, and wind-swept cliffs made every skirmish, firefight, and attack a nightmare beyond the men's wildest dreams. With tens of thousands of young Americans and Chinese locked in eye-to-eye, hand-to-hand combat in the desolate, freezing mountains surrounding the Chosin Reservoir, the death toll soared. Even men with minor wounds or injuries frequently died. If you stopped moving, you froze. The terrain and weather were so bad that Oliver P. Smith, the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, the largest American unit engaged at Chosin, said the mountains of North Korea were never intended for military operations. And every man who fought there would agree. To most of the soldiers and Marines who found themselves at the frozen reservoir from November to December 1950, the terrain looked more like the set of a Himalayan mountain climbing movie than a place to fight. But fight they did. They just kept coming with tens of thousands of disciplined and determined white-clad Chinese soldiers, attacking every night to the eerie sound of blaring bugles, shrieking whistles, and clashing cymbals. The Americans, Brits, and Koreans fought courageously, beating back wave after wave of Chinese attackers. The UN forces barely held on. Despite outdated weapons, inadequate food, supplies, and ammunition, the Chinese just kept coming. When a Chinese soldier went down, American veterans recalled dozens more suddenly appeared. By late November 1950, 1st Marine Division and the 31st Regimental Combat Team, surrounded and vastly outnumbered, were on the verge of annihilation. As casualties mounted, the generals realized that there was only one way to avoid catastrophic defeat: break out to the sea. Over the next 5 to 7 days, the Americans fought, or as O.P. Smith said, attacked in another direction, down a winding, treacherous, snow-packed road to Hungnam, a North Korean port 70 miles away. Through extraordinary willpower, exceptional warfighting skills, and countless acts of valor, U.S. Marines and soldiers escaped the Chosin trap. By the time U.S. forces, with thousands of North Korean refugees in tow, reached the evacuation beaches, nearly 6,000 Americans were dead or missing. Thousands more were wounded. None of the men who survived the horrific battle would ever be the same. Today, they are called the Chosen Few. The attempt at destroying the 1st Marine Division, however, had come with a hefty price tag. The communist dictator had lost an estimated 50,000 soldiers, including his eldest son, and had learned to never again underestimate the American fighting man. As the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. reminds us, freedom is not free. The men that served in the frozen Chosin had to endure more than most will ever be able to understand. This is the history of our country, the legacy of those men who were willing to answer the nation's call and sacrifice so much for the freedoms we enjoy today. The freedom and ability to go out and buy proper winter clothes so we don't have to be cold in the wintertime. The ability to be in our homes and when cold, be able to walk across the room, flip a switch, and a warm fire appears. Imagine the pride and belief white and whited had in their country. It wasn't a perfect country. It was still growing, developing, and she was striving to be better. It was, however, their country. White and whited described the American military's lack of preparation for such a forbidden climate. To shoot their weapons, they had to take off their clumsy mittens. Weapons failed to fire. Car batteries went dead, and lubricant gelled up in weapons and in vehicles. The blood plasma the U.S. Armed Forces had discovered for first aid purposes during World War II froze to solid blocks in the North Korean winter. What I find even more incredible is the mindset of these warriors. Knowing the tragic losses at Chosin Reservoir had been painfully high for U.S. troops. The estimated 18,000 casualties included about 2,500 killed in action, 5,000 wounded, and almost 8,000 who suffered from frostbite. They still pointed out there were troops far worse off than them, the Chinese. Some of the Chinese prisoners that we got, they were happy to be with us, remembers Whited. I just absolutely felt sorry for them. Their feet were nothing but ice. They had much lower morale than we did, White says he concluded at the time. Hastily mobilized from Manchuria for deployment in Korea, they lacked any winter clothing or sufficient food. With similar faulty information, Chinese military leadership made crucial mistakes that cost troops lives and gave the U.S. forces time to retreat. Some 30,000 Chinese soldiers perished from the cold alone, along with only about 20,000 casualties. There are two men that survived most of the horrific battles in our country's history, and they still point out that they had it better than their enemy. Ultimately, it could have been worse. I've been to combat. But what I can't imagine is not only having to fight the enemy, but to be fighting the weather conditions that are so fierce that if you stop moving, you freeze. 36 degrees below zero, ill-equipped, and you are fighting for your life against a determined enemy. We all owe the men of the Korean War a great debt of gratitude. We owe it to them to honor and respect our nation's flag, a symbol for which they sacrificed so much for so we can enjoy the freedoms we take for granted today. So when you're walking through the store and you see that elderly gentleman shuffling his feet, walking with a cane perhaps, in a ball cap that says Korean War veteran, take the time to stop and thank him for his service. Thank him for not only being willing, but able to survive something that most of us would never, ever be able to imagine. Honor him, because when he was 18 to 20 years old, he was a bigger badass than you and I will ever be. and he has paid his dues. To all of those who served in the Korean War, we thank you for your heart, your dedication, your example of what pride in our country looks like, your example of what true sacrifice looks like, and the reminder that we are free today because of greater men who did not return home. Our mission here at Bird's Eye View Project is simple: serve those who serve us. We do this by supporting organizations like Gratitude Initiative and One More Wave, both providing unique services to our active duty military veterans, and their families. I want to personally encourage all of you to go to onemorewave.net or gratitudeinitiative.org, or better yet, go to both. Spend a few minutes learning more about what they do for our amazing military veterans and get involved by making a donation. We want to thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this video, please like it on social media, share it, and invite someone you know to follow Bird's Eye View Project. Remember, love on one another, be kind to one another, and always serve those who serve us.